Morning, everybody. Welcome to this CPA NextGen event. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. My name is Alex Beale. I'm a Foresight Manager in the strategy team at Landsec, and I'm also the CPA NextGen Vice Chair. We've got a great panel of speakers lined up to speak to us this morning and share their expertise on wellbeing and on the city. But just to give you a bit of an overview before I introduce them on what we're going to be focusing on this morning. Now, the global public health crisis over the last 12 months has really highlighted the need to rethink our relationship with buildings around us. And offices in the City of London have long been leading the way on in design, focused on well-being and on sustainability. So with developers and tenants increasingly using sensors to measure aspects that are really important, like temperature, air quality, and light levels. And in this City Property Association webinar, which is organised by the NextGen Committee, we're going to explore how the pandemic has really accelerated solutions to improve the quality of life for businesses and for the people who work for them as well. So following months of remote working, steering clear of central locations, you can see our panel today are all working from home, of course. Our panel are really going to investigate the future of office design and of the city centre in more general. So what will the office space look like as occupiers display an increased demand for healthy and comfortable working environments and for their staff who really demand that? How is the sector going to change the way it approaches the design and the planning process? So this session is really going to question how our cities are being designed and ask industry leaders what lessons can be learnt about healthy design and what it might look like in the future. So over to the panel. I'm going to ask each of you to introduce yourself, your role, where you work, and then a quick little insight into your life, your routine. What's a well-being tip that you've taken on over the last 12 months as we've led very different lives to what we were leading before? So should we start in the top left of my screen? I've got you, Richard, if you want to start. You are on mute, Richard.
That's lesson number one from all of this. I'm Richard Francis. Thank you, Alex, and thank you to the panel and to the CPA for allowing us to present this morning. I'm Richard Francis. I'm Director of Sustainability at Gardner and Theobald. Have been so for about 15 years now. And for the last 5 years, for the purposes of this call, probably important to spell out our work with the World Green Building Council and the UK Green Building Council. We've been lead external consultants to both of those organizations, helping them develop metrics and frameworks around health, well-being, and productivity in buildings.
Thanks, Richard. Joe, do you want to go next?
Hi, yeah, my name is Joe Hare from White Red Architects. We're based in Shoreditch. We do a wide range of projects, but a lot of offices in central London. I think in terms of the working from home point, I think the big thing has been getting some discipline in the day and not sort of just working late and then sort of not being able to get to sleep. It's important to sort of close and actually get out and go for a run or something. Try not have a beer has been the big lesson, I think.
It's a good one. Marianne, do you want to go next?
Good morning and Happy New Year, everybody. Wishing you a happy and healthy New Year. Marianne Fredericks. I'm an elected councillor in the City of London for the ward of Tower, and I actually live in the city in my ward. I was elected 13 years ago to the Court of Common Council, and I have served as Chairman of Licensing, Chairman of Streets and Walkways, Deputy Chairman of Planning, and I'm now currently Chairman of the Health and Wellbeing Board. I have been busy throughout the pandemic here in the city. It's a very different city, I must say. I am missing everybody terribly. We're rattling around here with empty streets. But we do have a residential population, and the pandemic has really thrown up some new and interesting tasks for the City of London Corporation to manage going forward. We have a very small residential population and not a lot of shops and amenities open. And we have had food poverty and we've had to open up a square mile food bank. So there's lots of interesting things that have happened, but I am really missing the business community, and I really do hope you come back soon. So welcome.
Thanks, Marianne. Eva?
Hello, my name is Eva Kleinova. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm the head of user and client research at HB Reavis, which is a development firm, especially building offices. And I'm probably the only person here who's not based in London. So I'm actually based I'm calling from Bratislava, Slovakia. But we're responsible for 6 different countries, and including the London market. So you were asking about some of the tips of what we did over the pandemic. I think the biggest change for me, or coping mechanism for me, was that I bought a folding electric bike, which really kind of brought me. I live on a hill, so that's why the electric, and it really brought me so much joy throughout the summer and autumn. And now it's snowing here, so I can't use it, and I'm kind of sad about that, actually.
That's a great one. I know cycling has been very popular all over the world, I'm sure. Araceli.
Hi, I'm Araceli. I'm from the Centric Lab. I'm a neuroscientist, and what our lab does is it looks at the relationship between people and place, specifically how places either support or do not support people's health. In terms of a well-being tip, I've been doing a lot of things that connect me again with the breath. So meditation, yoga, dance, running, and also doing a lot of walks in nature. Nature has been a paramount, I would say, colleague. Also, I think a better colleague than those in the cities. I don't think I share the whole coming back with everybody else. If anything, I'm going to go further into the forest, and I will be coming at you in 3 weeks' time, hopefully from Florida. So yeah, heading back into nature.
That's a long commute back to the city, but I think that's a topic we will come on to, I'm sure, later on. Thank you very much to our panel for joining us for those introductions. So just to give our audience an understanding of timing, we're going to save 10, 15, 5 minutes at the end for Q&A. So do think up questions and post them in the chat as we go along. But at the start here, I'm just going to hand over to Marianne, who is going to talk us through what the city's been doing to really boost the sense of well-being for the people that live and work there. So over to you, Marianne.
Thank you. Welcome. I think today I'm pushing at an open door when I talk about the importance of health and well-being. I think we're all experts now on personal health and the importance of health in the community. So, as I said, I chair the Health and Wellbeing Board of the city, and that cuts across all aspects of the city corporation's life. We have our current joint health and wellbeing strategy, which has been renewed this year. And these priorities ensure that all the work the corporation carries out, we capture every opportunity to improve the health of our community. So the pandemic has really highlighted the importance of good health, both physical and mental. And our priorities, which are probably really relevant to today's discussion in our health and wellbeing strategy, are priorities 1 and 2. Priority 1 is good mental health, and that is for everybody, and also the importance of suicide prevention. Now, poor mental health in the City of London affects each of the 3 main communities addressed within our strategy: residents, workers, and rough sleepers. For many city workers, high pressures, competitive nature, and long working hours have triggered stress and mental health, including anxiety, depression, and risk-taking behaviour. Periods of severe economic problems, which we're actually going through now, and job instability will have an adverse effect on mental health, especially in the worker population. The city's location and distinctive infrastructure, including our high-rise buildings, rail and underground network, and the River Thames, sadly provides different means for suicide. So part of our suicide prevention work is firstly to raise awareness, offer practical advice on design of buildings, and particular care should be taken when you're designing high-level outside spaces. And of course, it's important to support mental health and also to talk about it. That's the key aspect. In the City of London last year, although we had to do it online, we have opened our wellness centre in Aldgate, and this is providing additional mental health support for business workers, students and residents alike. Now, the second priority is a healthy urban environment. There is strong evidence that the environment shapes health outcomes. A well-designed public realm and high-quality green open space will encourage physical exercise, improve mental health and increase biodiversity. Poor air quality contributes to shortening life expectancy of all Londoners, and it disproportionately impacts upon the most vulnerable. Poor air quality exacerbates heart and lung conditions, especially aspects like asthma. It's incredibly important that the city improves its air quality so it's a safe place to live and work. Public Health England showed that the City of London was one of the worst places in the country for air quality. We needed to address this urgently. So we set about our air quality strategy, which outlines our commitment to fulfil our obligations on air quality management, how we manage and monitor the effectiveness of policies, and introduce policies that will reduce levels of pollution. We also experience relatively high levels of noise, and we get lots of complaints, not just from residents, but also from businesses. It can disrupt business activities and spoil visitors' experience. So managing noise in the City of London is extremely challenging given the density of the development and vast transport network. But again, we have instigated a noise strategy, and we're working hard to improve quiet spaces in the city and to deal with noise complaints. Whilst we gathered ideas for our health and wellbeing strategy, one of the key asks from residents and workers was around the lack of green open space, community space, and space to exercise. So although we have a network of gardens and churchyards and parks, these are all very tiny spaces. And of course, we know they're heavily used, especially in the summertime. And where we can, we want to encourage more outside space, especially green. We want to get back to nature. And we know how important that is to improve mental and physical health. I can't emphasize enough the importance of green open space, especially for me during the pandemic, stuck here in a building in the heart of the city. A major concern has also been around road safety, especially for pedestrians and cyclists, at the same time as we want to promote more physical exercise and encourage walking and cycling. So before the pandemic, I'd like to think the corporation was already ahead of the curve. And the practical measures that we've taken to address those two priorities are, in terms of suicide prevention, as I said, raising awareness and talking about mental health and suicide is key. Offering expertise and practical advice on designing buildings, especially those high-level outdoor spaces, and supporting mental health by talking to businesses and workers. And we also have our Healthy Business, which is an online provision to support businesses and their workers. The other aspects to address priority two, the environment. We have a number of strategies, including transport, air quality, noise, and our new climate change strategy. But practical measures, these are all words. They don't work unless you put them into practice. So practical measures to improve pollution and safety. We have redesigned our roads. We've incorporated new public open space, green open space. If you think about projects such as Bank Junction, Aldgate, Holborn Circus, we've reduced traffic speed by 20 miles an hour, down to 20 miles an hour, and we're trying to reduce it down to 15. We have championed dockless cycling and encourage more people to walk and cycle around the city. And of course, in terms of designing buildings, we're encouraging buildings to be outward facing, not just providing health and well-being facilities for the people who work inside. The city is a community. Your workers will be going outside to share and enjoy the open spaces. And city residents also want to come in to your buildings and enjoy the provisions that you have inside. So I think going forward, the emerging city really needs to be designing buildings that improve health and well-being for all the community. To do that, we need to work in partnership with you all. And to help you and guide you, the new City Plan 2036, which is going before the Court of Common Council today, so we can go out for public consultation again, sets out all our guidance and our asks so that you're able to incorporate everything possible to improve the health and well-being in the building and improve the life expectancy of the people who work in that building. So interesting places create happy experiences, and happy people are healthier and provide a better community for all of us to enjoy. So there's lots of things to think about in terms of designing buildings. You're the experts, but I'd also like you to think about the outside spaces and how you can improve those for your workers and the rest of the community of the City of London. Thank you.
Really fascinating. Thank you for those remarks, Marianne. I think, yeah, there's loads of things there that's really interesting about kind of the two sections focusing on good mental health and then a healthy working environment. I was going to ask you, in terms of looking forward, is there anything that's happened in the last 12 months that has impacted or accelerated any of the changes that the city is bringing about, or that has kind of changed the emphasis and the focus for new legislation or new kind of research even?
Yes, I mean, as I said, these were our priorities set out before COVID. COVID has allowed us to accelerate them all and start implementing them. So when you do come back to the city, you will see our road network is completely being transformed. We've always suffered from cramped, dense pavements and lack of space for pedestrians. So the COVID measures have allowed us to widen temporarily pavements to see how that works. We've introduced more cycle lanes. We have closed roads. We've got one-way systems. The city has really been quite transformed. It's allowed us to test this to see how it will work and how it will be achieved. I think we all realise that we have to remove as much as we can in terms of traffic volume off the roads. And with the tall buildings, we have been pushing for consolidation centres to reduce servicing. So again, I think COVID is really going to accelerate that and focus everybody's minds on reducing traffic to allow the cities to become more of a people place.
Absolutely, brilliant. And then I've got one final question before we then move on to the panel. You mentioned working in partnerships, and that's very much the focus of the 2036 city plan. What's the ideal partnership from your perspective? How does that look with developers, local authority, and other partners as well?
All our stakeholders have a huge role to play here. We can't achieve this on our own. And we all want the City of London to have the best environment for everybody who comes into the city, works, lives and visits. And we have to do that together. And as I said, the partnership working, I think, is that we have to stop looking in a box. We've got to look outside that box. The spaces outside your buildings are incredibly important to the people who work in your buildings. And for the City of London, with the lack of amenities and the lack of space for shops and provisions and healthcare, we have one doctor's surgery in the City of London. One doctor's surgery, it's not enough. But we don't have the space to provide further surgeries. And that's where we're looking to you as our partners to provide these facilities in the buildings. So your facilities and your buildings become part of the city street scene. So there's blurring of these boundaries. So no longer does the building start at the threshold. Your building comes out into our public domain and our space. And we equally should be able to encourage the public into your buildings and have public uses so that they're multi-functioning and dynamic and flexible. And of course, flexibility is key here. The most flexible person in the room will be the most successful person in the room.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating about that adaptability and the kind of two-way dialogue and kind of opening up of public, like the boundary between public and private, is what I'm hearing, and I think that's really interesting. Great, thank you for setting such a great context for the rest of the discussion. I'm going to now move on to some questions to particular panelists. So, Araceli, if it's all right, I thought we'd start with you. I think if we open the context of the conversation up again and think about kind of the general aspects that really support health and well-being in the context of the built environment, and how should we be thinking about those, and how do we prioritize public health in the city?
Okay, so first, let's get to the crux of it. Sick places equals sick people. That is, I would say, the fundamental rule in this conversation. And then in terms of what we need, we have to stop thinking about single factors. Health is a multifactorial process that is ongoing. It's not a singular event. I think sometimes it gets framed that way. Second of all, it also gets framed as a binary. You're sick or you're not sick. It actually is a full process of deregulation that has to happen in order for a person to get sick. And equally, you have to heal a lot of those processes on the other side in order for a person to heal. The idea or the ideal is for people to have the resources to have a constant ability to be able to come back to stability or homeostasis, and the body to have a continual access to resources to heal in an ongoing basis. Unfortunately, we don't have that in cities, and we have a lot of work ahead of us in order to be able to get there, because our cities are highly artificial. They pull us away from exactly the resources that we need in order to be able to come back to homeostasis. So to do that, let's start with a new lexicon and a new vocabulary. Thinking about how we build in symbiosis with nature. So what does that mean? It means, by definition, symbiosis is when two entities that are living together, they complement, protect, nourish, and are in a reciprocal relationship. Unfortunately, that is not the case at the moment, our relationship with our cities, if we look at cities as habitat. So the first thing would be to look at our materiality. Inside of our buildings and outside of our buildings, we use artificial materiality, concrete, asphalt. Inside of buildings, we use chemically based furniture, walls, flooring, etc. They all carry VOCs that are damaging to us. So you don't even need a car to go on top of asphalt in order for asphalt to emit air pollution. Just chilling there, it emits VOCs. And we have to think about how do we reduce that? How do we bring in nature? And I don't mean this in this like facade, like like the fad of just biophilia in general, like really understand the way nature takes care of us. So plants, understand them at a very technical level. They're great humidifiers. They are great cleaners. They not only clean our air, but they produce new oxygen, which is incredibly important, which is something that our HVACs do not do. Then we also have to think about the external habitat where the building is. So that's what I mean about the external materiality, that in a lot of places that I walk around London, it doesn't look like London was designed. I mean, I know that it wasn't, but in recent years, still, we're not designing with climate change at all in mind. The wind tunnels that we see in the city of London, across London, that really shouldn't be. That's just simple engineering. But that is really important in terms of how people engage with the urban realm, right? That if we perceive it as harsh because we can't engage with it, because there's no place for us to find respite either from the wind or any other external element, then we're not going to interact with it. Amazingly, as I've been interacting way more with nature than I've had before, it's really interesting. Go in on a windy day, walk around a highly urbanized area, and then see the contrast of when you enter a very highly dense wooded area. You actually are completely sheltered. You're sheltered from the rain, you're sheltered from the wind. It's a very specific microclimate. And we do the antithesis of that in the urban realm. We expose people more to the elements and we leave them vulnerable to that. And for the elderly, for people that are neurodiverse, that can be a very harsh environment. So we have to think about that. And then finally, we have to start thinking not just of, like, yes, we obviously have to think about air pollution, but in the conversation of air pollution, what we miss out is not only that we're polluting our air internally and externally, we're also depleting our air of nutrients. So in the wild, we get access to microbes, and also the fidelity of our oxygen is being completely compromised in our urban environments. And we don't think about that. We don't think about our air being a form of nourishment, and it is. So the microbes that we inhale when we are walking through a forest or we're walking by water, those are important nutrients and enzymes that we need in our gut to help sustain our immune system. And that's the bit that I mean about it's a constant conversation. And we have had millennia of conversations and interactions with nature. We've only had actually technically a very small blip with these artificial environments. And that is what our body is used to. That is what our body needs in order to heal, in order to keep healthy. And so we really have to start understanding completely from ground zero that what we've done is antidotal to nature, to our personal nature, as well as to nature in the macro sense. And how do we start coming back to it and being more symbiotic with those principles?
Yeah, I think symbiotic there, that word you used at the end, sums it up really nicely, that the more we resist nature, the worse we feel, the less productive we probably are, the less well I'm sure we are. And yeah, the nature has got it right, and the more we resist that, that's to our detriment. So Richard, I'm going to move on to you because I know you work a lot with designers and accrediting buildings and assessing buildings, and I think the WELL accreditation certainly, as the one example, tries to ensure lots of those things that Araceli mentioned are intertwined in buildings. How much do you think that's going to become kind of a requirement, a minimum right to operate for buildings in the future, and for buildings that are going to be investable in the future?
I mean, there's a lot of interesting things that are going on here. In the UK, London is a particularly interesting place to be looking at this. I don't think a lot of people realize that in terms of the WELL project directory, the UK is the second biggest market in the world for WELL projects. And when it comes to Fitwell, which is WELL's nearest competitor, the UK is the third biggest market. So if you're looking at this kind of a thing, in terms of the projects number registered in the UK, we're very invested in this. And talking about synergy, just onto net zero carbon here for a second, not to make it more difficult conversation, but to realize that the UK is also the leading organization for net zero carbon as well, work at the UK GBC. And the synergies behind all of this, I think that most people are finding, whether they're doing WELL or any other kind of certification, is finding a way to connect the dots. And so our interest in WELL buildings came from our work with early versions of zero carbon buildings, where we found that the more you tighten the envelope, the poorer the indoor environment became. And so what we're seeing now, I think, worldwide is an interest in net zero carbon and WELL. That's certainly true. And we're seeing a coalescence around measuring those two things. I can tell you from my work since the pandemic, if there were 10 calls coming in, 9 of those 10 were either around net zero carbon or WELL. And so clearly worldwide, whereas we used to have this alphabet soup of certifications and concerns, we now have 2. And the real trick is trying to figure out how those 2 work together so that one doesn't frustrate the other. That's absolutely key, because particularly as we think about achieving environmental performance in terms of carbon, we have to keep our eye on the kind of things which are also going to deliver the kind of places that people want to be in, that are comfortable, that provide fresh air. And we've mentioned it a couple of times on this call. The word really is natural. So our work with the World Green Building Council found the same things that are kind of going to earn you points with WELL or FitWell or any other kind of certification all have natural in front of them: natural light, natural air, natural materials. And that's the kind of buildings that we are going to see, and we should see, as we're working towards sustainability, to keep our eye on the ball. So your more general question about reporting out, having a WELL certification in the investment community, or reporting out the impact of our buildings on people, that's happening already. You can't build a premium office building in any major city in the world without giving it some consideration to a certification. Now, whether is it WELL or FitWell or whatever it might be, there are cost implications, and it's not available to all kinds of buildings, and that's something we have to work on. But we know that more wellness certifications and more reporting around wellness are already happening with something as easily obtainable as a reset certification, which is a much less expensive version of WELL, available pretty much to any kind of building. And our own work with the World Green Building Council was designed so that any building anywhere in the world could begin to implement wellness. We know from our work with things like GRESB or even TCFD, companies are much more interested in reporting out their performance. This is also true of neighbors in the UK when it comes to energy. It's already happening with Reset. GRESB has already added the health and well-being part of this. This will accelerate, because what you can provide in real time with less than £1,000 worth of sensors and an internet connection is a broadcast to the entire world of how your places are impacting your people. We know this works, particularly in the pandemic, the amount of sensors that went into buildings, the amount of reporting back to occupants. It's going to be critical to luring them back and making them feel safe. We often think about climate change and carbon as the resiliency issue. Put right alongside that the quality of interior environments for people, particularly since the last 9 months. You're going to have to tell people, and it will become an investment criteria. There's already interesting work has been done before the pandemic around measuring the quality of the indoor environment, using that around due diligence and rent reviews. It's all going to become part of that. It used to be sort of down the line on the due diligence. It's now right near the top for all the obvious reasons. So companies will be doing this. They'll be telling more to their investors. They'll be telling more to their building users about what the quality of the environment is, because we all know that impacts ourselves. We've had 9 months to understand that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure they'll be also telling their architects all about the need to put the quality of indoor environments and accreditation reporting at the top of their priority list as well. And Joe, I'd love to hear your thoughts on kind of what the future of the office needs to be, because more of us are clearly today working from home. I think more of us in the future will be working from home as well, from kitchen tables to spare bedrooms to, you know, all sorts of other places. And that changes the role of what the office is. If we're not going in to do desk work by ourselves, I'd love to hear your thoughts on kind of how you're thinking about the design of the office in the future and what spaces need to be at the office if some work is happening at home.
Sure, yeah, I think I mean, critically, the office needs to provide everything that we can't do from home. I mean, in a nutshell, that's all the things that we miss about the office. The office needs to really work hard to do those things well and attract people back. And I think wellness is actually one of the things that right at the top of that list. As you know, there's all sorts of problems that we get working from home. A couple of ideas that we've been exploring recently, that how design can contribute towards well-being in the office, are how design can improve your self-esteem, how you feel about yourself and what you do. And another idea is, of course, bringing people together, how design can, bring people together in the right way, so that, you're working effectively, but also getting good social interaction. And we've applied this across a few projects recently. One project in Southampton for a student residential provider, Optivo. And we were looking at, with a very tight budget, refurbishing 300 rooms. And we realized that actually, we should be focusing here. I mean, we need to get the spec of these places up, but we can't do a huge amount with the budget. It's going to be more important to get people out of their rooms, get people coming together and socializing together. So we focused instead on this grade 2 listed warehouse that they had on the grounds. We built the student pavilion there that would bring people together to play games, to work, it had co-working, it had places for individual study, and it had places to socialize. So suddenly students were out of their rooms, where, you know, we've got a big problem with student wellness in the country and mental health. And it's very easy to shut yourself in your room once you leave home and go off to university on your own. It's very easy to shut yourself in your room if you're struggling. It's important to get people out and back sort of socializing and talking. And actually, you know, that applies to us now as we're working from home, and you know, the need to probably get out of home a little bit more. And as we get back to the office, you know, the office should be, you know, doing the same sort of thing, making us feel better about ourselves. So another project we've just finished in Covent Garden is spec office for Royal London. We've looked at doing quite a bold design for spec office. So we've taken a lot of character from the nearby Covent Garden Market and the London Transport Museum, big green arches. So we give the building a lot more character. So it's easier to form a connection with it, and you feel more positively about where you work. It's more clearly defined and it's local. The other thing we've done is to focus on the reception as a sort of critical social hub of the project. And so, you know, look, this space is actually the most important place in the building, not the office floor plate. This space should have its own meeting room. It should have a big dining table where you can sit and have a meeting. It should have individual places to work, and you should be invited to stop, pause, bump into people, have a meeting, and generally activate the first point you enter into the building. It activates it from the street, and it makes it for a much happier, healthier place. And that then also applied to our office. So we've moved office right in the middle of lockdown. And the perfect time to do so. But that experience of working from home really influenced the decisions we made in our new office. So we have taken a shop front, an old shop, basically, with a big glass front, because that's an opportunity to show our models and our process. And, you know, again, it's about feeling good about yourself, about showing what you do, and feeling, you know, your purpose is clear and you can see the activity. And the other thing we've done is we brought all of the social spaces of our office to the front. So our kitchen and our workshop are right at the front. So as you come into the front door, you know, you get that there's always someone there. You have some sort of social interaction. So that's, I think, sort of critical for what the office needs to do in the future. It really needs to make the experiences that you can't have at home very, very enjoyable and very focused, very flexible as well. And so, yeah, I think that's where we're going to be going.
I love that idea of the office as a shop front. I wonder how many more organizations in the future are going to think of their space where people gather and work as going to be as a shop front rather than a kind of a floor plate with desks on it.
Oh, that's it. You know, you do get a few people coming in through the front door saying, "What do you guys sell?" Which is a little bit unusual. That's
got to be an endorsement though. If they want to buy it, they don't
start putting some prices on the models.
Excellent. So Eva, finally, we're talking to you from Bratislava in Slovakia, but I know you work across lots of countries as with the HP Previous team. What are the trends that are top of mind for you in terms of the future of healthy buildings? I'd love to hear kind of some of the most kind of noteworthy data points or case studies that you think are really impacting your work at the moment.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I think first of all, there's just generally across the different countries that we work in a much greater awareness everywhere among companies residing in buildings about what constitutes a healthy building. I think that's the case in London as well, for obvious reasons. These are right now focused more on solutions that limit COVID, so the acute disease, let's say. So various protocols, touch-free surfaces, air solutions, new materials, maybe in the future, not yet necessarily always present, and a greater interest in WELL certifications, I think, everywhere. So London is a leading market here, but I think it's kind of spreading in other places as well. But we also expect this awareness to translate into an even greater interest in health in general. So not just the acute, respiratory issues that we have right now. And it's been a mega trend for a while for people to be concerned about health, for users to be concerned about health. So how do we maintain the good physical health through, movement, food, active design, and so on? Not just when we have a pandemic, but in general. The second thing, I think, also leading up to what Marianne mentioned before, is this just general greater companies being kind of much more attuned to questions of mental health and loneliness, because we've all experienced versions of despair, I would say, and how we can address those through design or services in the office and in the hybrid office, which is coming up. So it's not just the physical space of the office, but also like how that translates across the virtual physical. From my experience, at least, it seems like companies are sort of in a wait and see attitude right now, a little bit, regarding radical changes to their spaces right now, because there's so much uncertainty still, which is natural. So if anything, they're sort of working to reduce space, probably figuring out how they operate in this hybrid world. But like Joe mentioned, I really love the idea about the storefront, because I think eventually, especially those companies working in more innovative or creative industries like architecture here, we see it as they will need office to build trust and to build culture and to innovate, because that's research kind of very consistently shows that you have to do that face to face. And then especially those companies will really need to kind of find a way to bring back people to offices when it's safe to do so, obviously, and maybe not every day, probably not every day, but they will need to kind of create a different kind of space, and that's a discussion that we're having across the markets as well. But it depends very much on the structure of the industry. So London has many more, much greater concentration of innovative and creative firms. In some other places in Central Europe, you might have more routine jobs sometimes, and those will likely not return to the office as much or as intensely. But to bring it kind of closer to London, I think like one project that I had in mind, which is I think a good example of some of the kind of preparation for the post-COVID reality or so on, is our project, which is called Bloom. It's on Farringdon Street, on top of the Farringdon station, that is being built right now. And I think that the two things that sort of are interesting about it, one is that it's really designed around health and sustainability, with these kind of massive terraces. We talked about the natural elements, so the views and the greenery and so on. Obviously, some gym and so on facilities, bike facilities, and really kind of high level certifications in both sustainability and health. But the other thing that I think is interesting, and I don't think we mentioned it here yet, but I think it's an interesting phenomenon, possibly impacting the bigger cities more than smaller cities, is the idea that there are people moving out of the city, or some people are moving to kind of closer to the nature or to less dense environments, while because the hybrid environment is allowing them to, in a way, and so I think places like this, which are really on top of, it's on top of the Crossrail, the Elizabeth line, which allow them to be, really linked to also places outside of the city easily for, 2 times a week commute or something like that, are going to grow in importance, as are places that are really close to really good bike transportation. So, we have these concepts of the 15-minute or 20-minute cities, depending on who's talking, of where you can get on foot or on bike within that period, and where you can kind of get everything done in that period of time. And I think those will be kind of really, that's a nice concept to think about when looking at which which places will thrive more and how we can design around them.
Yeah, definitely. I think, yeah, what I'm hearing is about the design of or the location of offices is equally as important when it comes to wellness as the design. If you've got somewhere where a city where people are moving further out, then being close to transport links becomes even more important than perhaps it was when everyone could get to the city centre more easily. I'm going to ask one more question and then we can go on to the Q&A. I can see lots of people asking some great questions, so we'll come on to those. But this is one for anyone in the panel who wants to chip in, really. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what the future city looks like that is emerging, not necessarily kind of wishful thinking, but the reality. So is that more suburbanization or decentralization, people moving away from living in an urban dense location to access nature, like you mentioned, Araceli? Is it kind of live data to understand how different groups are kind of being affected by pandemics and by kind of overall kind of policy and things like that? How do we see the kind of emerging city? Richard, I can see you've unmuted. Do you want to chip in?
I mean, it's a very big issue. So let me just mention a couple of things I think that you're right on. I think we're going to have a much more data-driven city for sure. And in fact, we're already beginning to see these things now. So if you want to know where to ride your bike or to walk your kids to school in an area where the air quality is good, you can jump on after this call and find that. And we're going to see the same thing that you see outside of buildings transferred 10 feet from the curb to inside. So, and universities are already doing this. They get very good about this. They're telling you, if you want to find a healthy space, this is where you come to. And once we get the platforms for that and the knowledge around that, and that's growing all the time, we're going to create a market for healthy spaces, which is going to boom. I think the one thing that I would say right now is health and well-being, as big as it is, commercially is actually quite small. The number of certified buildings around is tiny. And whether they're in the city or in the suburbs of hubs, we're going to need more of them because the demand for this in buildings is going to follow the demand for healthy things in other products like food and vehicles and cosmetics and beauty products. There's a huge market for healthy products in general, and that's going to grow in buildings. And so the future city will be one built around health. But it's not just buildings, it's where those buildings are, how we get to them. I mean, there hasn't been a person occupying a lot of green buildings for the last 9 months, not because there aren't healthy or green buildings, but because the way you get to them is unhealthy. And so there's a connection, all of this is going to have to be rethought. I mean, it's a huge question, but the connection between where we are and how we are is fundamentally being reevaluated. And whether that's cities or how we get to them or how we spend our time and how much we spend our time in certain places, we're going to know much more about that. We're going to know much more about the places and how they impact us. And that's going to drive decisions.
So I was going to add to that this obviously has been a massive experiment, all of us working from home, and us, as I say, taking this shop front. We've actually grown quite a bit this last year, and we've actually now not really got enough space left. And instead of taking a bigger space, I can see us easily perhaps taking another shop front in a different part of town that might have slightly different services, slightly different equipment in it, but it would also allow people to commute shorter distances, work in different teams, spend less time traveling. I think we've all, big part of this experiment is learning a bit more about the work-life balance and what you can and can't do from home, and what you want to spend more time with your kids, or you want to spend more time doing whatever it is. Commuting and moving and being somewhere every single day in the same place puts a lot of restriction on that. And I think flexibility going forward might mean decentralized offices, smaller offices, different facilities, different equipment, and different teams working in different times. So it's, I think that's quite a nice opportunity looking ahead.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
maybe I'll I really like what you just said, Joe, and I think it comes to the idea that the flows in the city will just change. How, because people will work from many different places, from the home, from local co-works or local offices, from the kind of head office sometimes to collaborate with the right people and so on. And those flows will somehow we'll have to find a way to measure them, but they will also be sometimes a little bit unpredictable because a lot of the work, routine work will not necessarily require an office, but which is predictable, but the creative work is less predictable. So you have to, you will have to just let it kind of flow. And I think it's interesting how that will impact the city, but also how that will impact the buildings themselves, because they will have to find a way to sort of like inflate and deflate in real time sometimes, or I think it will increase the importance of co-working spaces are having a hard time right now, but I think they will survive this because of this, because of their ability to kind of accommodate these additional people, as well as sort of serviced offices that can accommodate teams for unpredictable growth of companies, which I think will happen. So I think that's all of those things we'll have to figure out. I don't know. I don't think any of us know exactly how that's going to work out, and we'll just have to figure it out as we go.
Yeah. Araceli, I'm going to come to you. There's a couple of questions in the Q&A. One in particular about what are your best examples of a symbiotic urban environment, and I'm going to build on that and ask you if the city, using another question from the Q&A, if the City of London brings in more green spaces, more nature, is that enough? Is that addressing some elements of well-being for people who live and work there, or does more need to be done?
Okay, well, a couple of things. So in terms, I did want to add to the conversation from the last couple of statements. I think we make it too hard for ourselves, and that we're trying to pretend that we're going to do a magic 8-ball and we're all like trying to predict what comes next. It's not that hard. It really isn't. The heuristics have been set by the challenges that we're seeing. So now the question is how do we respond, right? If it's cold outside, what do? You don't sit there and go, oh, let me I don't know, consult what should happen. You put a coat on. And that is how we have to deal with these problems. We are going to get our asses kicked by climate change. We got to make our cities, our buildings, our way of life adaptable to that. We're getting sicker. We have to create the responses accordingly. So I was just going to say that, like, we got to reframe the way that we think about problems. In terms of examples, yes, I saw the questions. So there's 3. One is over in the Sahel in Chad. The Chad Lake it's an ecosystem that has been massively eroded and depleted due to Western exploitation. And they are now going back to indigenous knowledge and technology to create micro irrigation systems, and also finding ways to repopulate, renourish the lake. And they're doing that to really great effect. So they're reestablishing their food supply chains, and they're also adapting the way that they are growing as a society according to the sustainability and I would say the healing of that environment. There's also Chiapas in Mexico. They're indigenous people as well. The way that they cultivate, the system that they use to be able to cultivate, where the soil is constantly nourished, regenerated, and it's never overexploited, is again another really good technique of how to work within your environment and with your environment. And their idea is that you can never overtake from the land. And then I would say in a more Western city, Vancouver has the only, that I know of, Indigenous-led or Native American-led development company that is looking at maintaining all the natural habitats at Vancouver as is. So there is no there's no negotiation with nature. They stay as is, and it's how to conserve it and how do we live again symbiotically within the system that's already in Vancouver. And of course, Vancouver is becoming a highly popular city. So then the question is, again, it's not how many people do we accommodate, is how do we change the behavior so people, again, can live symbiotically with nature. And you had a third question, which was? There was a third one in there, but I can't remember.
I mean, I think that was pretty comprehensive. My third question was about is bringing nature into the city and into the requirement for new buildings enough?
No.
I had a feeling you might say no.
Again, it's a question of really using our mental prowess. So like we got to get smarter at solving problems. Just putting the park doesn't work for two reasons. Number one, we don't understand what vegetation we're putting in there for what, right? We got to work with ecologists that understand the microbiome to go, guys, these are the types of vegetation that work together, that engineer the most effective and nourishing environment. So when we interact with it, it's clean, it's nourishing, right? Secondly, we have to think about the social dynamics that push people towards a park or away from a park, that it's not, again, you build it, people go. So I would say those are the two factors that we have to really start thinking about the trees and vegetation as we do infrastructure. We build a bridge according to the tonnage that's going to go on top of it. We have to think of trees and natural infrastructure in that same way.
Yeah, all has to be holistic. I think that's a great point. I can see we're coming up to the final, to the end of the webinar. So I'm just going to ask each of you to contribute one final answer. So if the people that are dialed in today could take away one tip to boost well-being in their own personal lives, but also kind of for the industry and for the built environment in the future, what would that be? It could be as simple as, you know, dialing into this webinar as one example, or reading a white paper or something like that. But if you could just give somebody one tip who's listening, what would that be? Joe, I'm going to start with you.
I think I made the point before, but I mean, the big thing, I think the big opportunity here is to see your work-life balance a little bit better. Try and take away from this experience, you know, what's important to you, and try and sort of, you know, build your life in a more healthy way going forward.
That's great, thank you, Marianne. I can see you're still there. I'm hoping you can still hear me. Are you able to come off mute? Excellent.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with Joe. I think balance, the word balance is the key, and it's how you balance your life and your work life and your home life. Doesn't matter as long as it's balanced, and live with nature. Go out there and walk on the grass. Absolutely.
Araceli?
It sounds really insignificant, but it's not. Breathe. We don't do it properly, unfortunately, the way we're sitting. So sit up straight. If you're having to sit up, and let that space in your abdomen have the most amount of openness so you can get the breath in. The breath is anti-inflammatory. It brings down your ACTH and cortisol hormones, which contribute to feeling stressed. And it's also a really great way to get your microbiome to work the way that it needs to. It's also great, amazingly, for cognition. Yes, we need oxygen. So do that, and ventilate your home if you can, because carbon dioxide that comes out of your mouth is a waste. We need clean oxygen in order for us to stay well throughout the day. We don't drink dirty water. We shouldn't be inhaling dirty air.
I think that's a great tip. Eva?
I guess I would say, just moving and standing more is a general thing that we can probably all do, even in this situation. So thinking about how we do that at work, but also at home, you know, standing desks or higher kind of and an ability to, and I mean, from my experience, you know, if it makes sense for you, then buy a bike or walk to work, if that's possible.
Yeah, that's a great tip. And then finally, Richard?
Sure. I think we've heard this word a lot over the pandemic, but thinking about essentials. And I think we've made over the last 30 years, and certainly sustainability a really complicated concept. and it's not. The things that, this answers one of the questions that came up in the chat, the things that people value most in buildings increasingly are air and light. Nature provides those for free. So if we think sustainability is an expensive or difficult concept, to come back to Araceli's point, we're overthinking it. Start mimicking nature, start bringing in the natural solutions. You'll have a building that's good for you, the people in it, and your business.
Brilliant. I think that's a great note to end on. I think we've had some really great perspectives there, some great case studies, some further research, some calls to action. So thank you very much to a great panel. That's been a brilliant hour of discussion. I also want to thank our CPA NextGen sponsors, which is Grant and Theobald. So thank you to them, and thanks for everyone who dialed in. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Bye.